While I was away on a business trip, my parents sold my dream house to pay for my brother's luxury vacation. When I came back, my dad smirked, "Your house covered their fun." I just smiled. "What's so funny?" he barked. I said, "The house you sold was." I came home from a business trip to a betrayal that still burns. My parents had sold my house right out from under me, all to fund my brother's lavish vacation and their shiny new cars. They thought they'd gotten away with it, but what they didn't know was that my home wasn't just a house, it was a ticking time bomb for their entire inheritance. Look, my name's Garrett Miller, and I'm 34. I've been an international marketing consultant for a while now, and I've been living completely independently since I was 18. I grew up in Pasadena, California, in what looked like a perfectly normal, middle-class home. And usually, I don't dwell on the past. But for this story, you really need to understand what that home was like, especially how love seemed to flow in only one direction. My parents, Robert and Linda, they were just ordinary. Dad worked at a bank, Mom was a freelance accountant. They had the small house, the white picket fence, the minivan. From the outside, totally stable. But inside, it was anything but. I have a younger brother, Brian, 4 years younger than me. And honestly, from the time we were kids, I could feel it, the difference in how they treated us. Brian? He was the golden boy. Always. Didn't matter that he was lazy, couldn't hold a job for more than 6 months. My parents shielded him, always found an excuse. "Oh, Brian's just finding his way," Mom would say, even after he quit his 5th job because his boss didn't understand him. Me? I put myself through college. Juggled 3 jobs at once, waiting tables, delivering packages, being an office assistant. I graduated debt-free, and I didn't resent it. I believed in hard work. I knew it would pay off. And I had one person who always believed in me, my grandfather, Norman. My grandfather, Norman, he was my rock. A construction worker, rough hands, but the warmest heart. He'd sit with me on the porch, tell me stories about building his life from nothing. He'd always say, in his deep, steady voice, "Garrett, your strength, that's your true asset. Money, houses, cars. They're just tools. But your will. No one can ever take that away from you." Those words. They were etched into my mind, like a guiding flame through all those exhausting days. When he passed, I was 18. He left me a trust fund, a good chunk of change I could only touch partially at 25, but only if I proved myself worthy. And I did. 7 years of non-stop grinding later, I used part of that trust for a down payment on this old craftsman house in Pasadena. It wasn't a mansion, nothing flashy, but to me, it was everything. This house was my dream. A single-story wooden home, a wide porch, beautiful stained glass windows, a little backyard garden. It was old, yeah, and it needed work, but I loved every single crack in those hardwood floors, every chipped brick in the fireplace. I spent months fixing it up myself. Sanding floors, repainting walls, replacing window panes. I even planted a rose garden out back, just for my grandmother, who loved roses more than anything. Every time I stood there, breathing in that sweet scent, it felt like she was right there, smiling at me. But my parents and Brian, they never got it. To them, it was just an old pile of wood. The kitchen's outdated. The walls are peeling. It's a waste of money to fix, my mom actually said, mockingly, when I invited them over to show it off. Brian was even worse. He scoffed, called me crazy for buying a chicken coop when I could have gotten a modern downtown apartment. I just smiled. They didn't understand. This wasn't just a house. It was a symbol. A symbol of all those years I fought, the sleepless nights, every single time I pushed myself to be stronger. The chasm between Brian and me wasn't just our personalities. It was about how my parents treated us. While I was scraping every penny together for my house, Brian was just handed everything. A new car. Parents bought it. Pocket money. Mom slipped it into his hand every single week. Credit card debt. Dad paid it off. I wasn't jealous, not really, but that sheer unfairness. It gnawed at me. I'd done everything right. Studied, worked my tail off, stood on my own 2 feet. But every time I went home, it was the same story. Mom gushing about Brian's new opportunities, Dad talking about how Brian was about to do something big. That big moment never came. I remember once, right after I'd been promoted at my consulting firm, I went home for dinner. Brian, naturally, was complaining about being fired again. My boss just didn't know how to use me, he mumbled, beer in hand, glaring right at me. Not everyone's as lucky as you, Garrett, always having everything handed to them. I was stunned. Lucky me. The one who'd worked himself to exhaustion to get where I was. I didn't even bother. I just ate my dinner in silence and left. I'd learned arguing with Brian, or trying to explain anything to my parents, was utterly pointless. But then everything changed. A huge opportunity landed in my lap, a 6-week international consulting project in London and Frankfurt. This was a pivotal moment, the kind that could seriously launch my career. I was thrilled, absolutely, but also anxious. 6 weeks felt like an eternity, and I hated the thought of my house sitting empty. So, I figured, who better to ask than my parents? Just stop by, check the locks, water the rose garden. Easy, right? A small task. But the moment I handed that house key to my father, a cold dread snaked into my heart. It felt like I was entrusting a piece of my very soul to someone who just didn't value it. Not one bit. That last dinner before my flight. It was at my parents' place, a small house in Pasadena with that familiar white picket fence and the smell of barbecue. I'd arrived in a decent mood, hoping for a warm send-off. But the second I walked in, that familiar atmosphere just hit me. Mom bustling in the kitchen, Dad glued to the football, and Brian sprawled on the sofa, phone in hand, his voice dripping with frustration. Work sucks. My boss keeps giving me pointless tasks. I can't waste my youth at that company. I risked a glance, biting back the urge to ask what these pointless tasks even were. Instead, I just nodded, sat at the table, and tried to focus on the steak Mom had just brought out. Garrett, tell me about your Europe trip, Mom said. But I knew it was just politeness. I started talking about the project, a huge international marketing campaign, London, Frankfurt, meeting executives, building strategies. It was a career-defining moment, a chance to prove all those years of hard work weren't for nothing. But as I spoke, Mom's eyes kept drifting to Brian, like he was the one who actually needed attention. Brian's considering a new job, she suddenly interrupted, her voice practically bubbling with excitement. A tech startup. They say it's very promising. I just stopped. The food in front of me went cold. Brian? Mr. never held a job for 6 months. Now he had a promising opportunity. I looked at him, hoping to see some spark of enthusiasm, but Brian just shrugged, eyes still on his phone. Maybe, he mumbled. But it's stressful. I need a break first. I swallowed hard, fighting down the question screaming in my head, *a break. You've been on a break your entire life, *. Then, Dad, who usually stayed silent during these dinners, spoke up. Garrett, you're going away for so long. What about your house? I jumped at the chance to change the subject. Could you and Mom look after it for me? Just stop by, check the doors, water the plants. I pulled the key from my pocket and placed it right on the table. Dad nodded, but his eyes were distant, his mind clearly somewhere else. All right, he said, then turned back to the TV. Mom patted Brian's shoulder. My boy needs to relax. Work is so stressful, isn't it? A hot rage flared in my chest. Stressful. Brian had no idea what stress was. He lived off their money while I had paid for every single thing, from college tuition to every brick in my craftsman house. But I stayed silent. I'd learned arguing with them was a dead end. Instead, I stood up, thanked Mom for the meal, and practically pushed the key into Dad's hand. I'm off. Tell Brian I said hi when he looks up from his phone, I said, trying to keep it light. Brian just glared, said nothing. The next day, I boarded that flight to London. As the plane took off, I looked out the window, thinking of my house. I pictured the rose garden, those vibrant red petals glowing under the California sun. Everything will be fine, I told myself. But deep down, a tiny, chilling voice whispered that I had just made a monumental mistake. London met me with its usual drizzle and a whirlwind pace. The project kicked off instantly, and I dove into work like a machine. Late-night meetings, endless revisions, presentations to top executives, I barely had time to breathe. But I loved it. I thrived on the challenge, the chance to truly prove myself. Every night, back in my hotel room, I'd check emails, send reports, and sometimes, just sometimes, I'd let myself dream of going home. Walking back into my craftsman house, sitting on the porch with a hot coffee, gazing at that rose garden. But then, around the 3rd week, I got a message from Brian. Not a check-in, not a how are you? Just an Instagram link. I clicked it. And there it was, a whole series of photos. Brian in the Maldives. White sandy beaches. Crystal clear infinity pools. A luxurious bungalow overlooking the ocean. Brian, in a crisp white linen shirt, grinning next to some girl I'd never seen. The caption. Paradise found. Need more days like this. I just sat there, in my cold London hotel room, staring at that screen, feeling like someone had sucker punched me. The Maldives. Where on earth did Brian get that kind of money? He'd just lost his job, was drowning in credit card debt, and my parents? They weren't wealthy enough to fund a lavish trip like that. I texted him, looks nice. Who are you with? No reply. I called Mom. Straight to voicemail. Called Dad. Rang a few times, then voicemail. That knot of unease. It started to tighten. I tried to tell myself I was overthinking. Maybe Brian borrowed money. Maybe he won the lottery. I didn't know. I just knew something was terribly, terribly wrong. The next few weeks, I tried to focus, but the image of Brian in the Maldives haunted me. I started checking his Instagram obsessively. Each new post was like a fresh stab: seafood dinners on the beach, cocktails in expensive glassware, a photo of him on a yacht with that smug grin. I didn't understand. Brian had no money. My parents couldn't afford this. Or could they? I started calling home more often, but their answers were always so vague. Everything's fine, Garrett, Mom said during one brief call. Your house is fine. Don't worry. But her voice was strained, like she was hiding something. Dad was even briefer, I'm busy. Talk later. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. But every single night, lying in that hotel bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister was happening behind my back. 6 weeks in Europe just vanished in a whirlwind. The project was a massive success, high fives from executives, promises of a promotion back home. But that buzz, that joy. It couldn't quiet the growing dread in my heart. Brian's Maldives photos, my parents' weird evasiveness, it was like pieces of a puzzle I just couldn't solve yet. All I craved was to go home. To step back into my craftsman house, sit on that porch, gaze at my rose garden. To feel the peace I'd spent my entire youth building. When the plane finally touched down in Los Angeles, I took a deep breath, trying to shove all the dark thoughts away. Everything will be fine, I told myself, though even my own voice sounded unconvinced. I hailed a taxi straight to my parents' house in Pasadena to pick up my key. On the way, I did it again, checked Brian's Instagram, like some twisted addiction. His latest post made me absolutely freeze. It was a selfie of him, standing in front of a shiny new SUV, that same smug grin on his face. The caption, "Welcome to the new ride." My heart started hammering. Brian had no money for a car. He'd just lost his job, was drowning in debt. Where did this come from? Then, as the taxi pulled up to my parents' house, I saw another detail that made my chest tighten. Parked in the driveway, gleaming under the California sun, was a brand new sedan. Not Brian's SUV, but another expensive car. I stepped out of the taxi, gripping my phone, feeling like a boulder was crushing me. My father appeared at the front door, wearing a brand new shirt. His eyes were cold, completely devoid of emotion. "Come in, Garrett," he said, his voice low, but utterly devoid of its usual warmth. "We need to talk." I walked inside. The air was thick, heavy, like the calm before a devastating storm. Mom was at the dining table, hands clasped tight, eyes glued to the floor. Brian wasn't there, but his presence was a dark shadow in the room. I put my suitcase down, forcing my voice to be steady. "Where's my house key, Dad?" I asked. But the look in their eyes. It told me the answer wasn't going to be simple. Mom finally looked up, her lips pressed thin. Then, her voice trembling, she said, "Garrett, your house. We sold it." The world just stopped. I stood there, frozen, my ears ringing like I'd just been punched. "Sold." I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. "Sold my house." "What do you mean?" Mom couldn't meet my gaze, she just looked away. Dad crossed his arms, his voice firm. "We needed the money, Garrett. Brian needed a fresh start. He deserved to enjoy himself a little. And I needed a new car." I just stared at my father, like he was a complete stranger. "My house," I said, my voice shaking with pure, unadulterated anger. "I spent my entire life saving for it. Every dollar, every hour of work, every callus on my hands from fixing it up. You sold it to buy you a car and pay for Brian's Maldives trip." I was practically shouting. But Dad just shrugged, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "You're always fine, Garrett," he said. "You have a good job. You have money. Brian doesn't. He needs us." My blood boiled. Brian is 30 years old. He can't hold a job for more than 6 months, and you still coddle him like a child. I turned to Mom, desperate for some flicker of remorse, but she just pressed her lips together, muttering, "You don't understand, Garrett." Brian was stressed. He needed a vacation to recharge. A vacation. I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. The world was mocking me. A vacation in the Maldives. At a 5-star resort, with his girlfriend and friends. And you sold my house to pay for that. To buy new cars. I stepped forward, grabbing Mom's hand, searching for any glimmer of hope that this was all just a misunderstanding. But her eyes told me everything. The cold, undeniable truth. My craftsman house, where I'd poured my sweat and tears, where I'd planted that rose garden for my grandmother, now belonged to someone else. Dad opened a drawer, pulled out a stack of crumpled bills, and tossed them onto the table. "This is what's left after we sold the house," he said. I nearly lost it. I stormed out of that house, leaving the keys, the money, everything. Refused to hear another word from them. I took a taxi straight to my house. Or, what used to be my house. When it pulled up, my heart just felt like it was being physically crushed. The stained glass windows were still there, but the curtains were different. My rose garden looked tempered with. I got out, stood at the gate, and then I saw them, an elderly couple watering plants. The woman looked up and smiled. "Hello. Can I help you?" My throat was dry. "This was my house," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. The man stopped watering, confused. "Your house? Are you Garrett? We bought this house a month ago, from your parents. They said you'd moved abroad to live." I recoiled. My parents hadn't just sold my house. They'd lied. Fabricated this whole story to justify their actions. I got back in the taxi, totally adrift. I called David, my best friend from college, who was now a junior lawyer. "David, I need to see you. Right now," I choked out. He agreed to meet at a nearby coffee shop. There, I just poured everything out. Brian's lavish Maldives trip, his new car, Dad's new car, and the biggest shock of all, my craftsman house, sold behind my back. Every word felt like a knife twisting in my gut, but I tried to stay calm, praying David could make sense of this madness. David listened, brows furrowed, eyes pensive. When I finished, he tapped his fingers on the table, like he was organizing all my scrambled words. "Garrett," he said, his voice low but steady, "your house, it's not just personal property, is it? You mentioned using part of your grandfather's trust fund for it, right?" I nodded, a tiny spark of light in the overwhelming darkness. My grandfather Norman's trust fund. I had used part of it for the down payment, and it was still tied to the trust. I was the primary trustee until I turned 35. "If your parents sold the house without your consent, that's potentially illegal," David said, his eyes suddenly bright. "But I don't know the exact trust terms. You need to talk to the lawyer handling it. Mr. Harrison, right? He's experienced." "Fair. He can help you, but you'll need evidence. Documents, contracts, anything proving they did this behind your back." My heart pounded. David's words were a lifeline. I vaguely remembered Grandpa talking about the trust, about protecting assets for the next generation. "I think he mentioned a protective clause," I stammered, "that anyone who intentionally misappropriated trust assets would forfeit their inheritance. Do you think I have a chance?" I asked, my voice trembling. David gripped my shoulder, his gaze unwavering. "See Mr. Harrison. Gather the evidence. I'm telling you, Garrett, you've got a strong case." I left that coffee shop, my mind a whirlwind, but with a flicker of hope. I hadn't just lost my house. I'd lost my sense of security, my trust in my family. But if David was right, if I could prove my parents and Brian had truly crossed a line, I could reclaim what was mine. The image of my rose garden flashed in my mind, but it was quickly overshadowed by Dad's cold face, Mom's evasive eyes, and Brian's smug Instagram smile. My fists clenched. Determination burned through me. They thought they could take everything and just walk away. They were dead wrong. I would uncover the truth and I would make them pay. I immediately called Mr. Harrison, the lawyer who handled my grandfather Norman's trust. I'd only met him a few times, mostly when I was 25, and he explained I could use a portion of the funds to buy my craftsman house. His voice on the phone was just as deep and calm as I remembered, but I heard a flicker of concern when I told him I needed to see him, right away. "Garrett, are you okay?" he asked. "No," I replied, my voice raw. "I need your help. Something huge has happened." We met at his office in downtown Pasadena, a small building with polished oak panels and that distinct smell of old paper. When I walked in, Mr. Harrison stood up. His white hair and round glasses made him look like a character straight out of a classic novel. He shook my hand, his eyes sharp but kind. "Sit down, Garrett," he said, gesturing to a leather chair. "Tell me what's going on." I took a deep breath, trying to bottle up the storm of emotions threatening to spill over. I told him everything. My 6 weeks in Europe, Brian's Maldives photos, my father's new car, and then the gut punch, my parents selling my craftsman house without a word to me. They said they needed the money for Brian's fresh start, I explained, my voice trembling with anger. But that was my house, Mr. Harrison. I used money from my grandfather's trust to buy it. How could they sell it without my permission? Mr. Harrison listened, his hand resting on his chin, his eyes never leaving mine. When I finished, he sat in silence for a moment, then stood and walked to a filing cabinet. He pulled out a thick folder, bound in dark brown leather, with Norman Miller Trust elegantly embossed on the cover. "Garrett," he said, his voice low but weighted with authority. "That house isn't just your personal property. It belongs to the trust, and you are the sole trustee until you turn 35. If your parents sold it without your permission, that is a very serious matter." My heart hammered, a sudden burst of hope piercing the darkness. "How serious, Mr. Harrison?" I asked, my voice dropping to a near whisper. He opened the folder, flipped a few pages, and pointed to a highlighted paragraph. "Let me explain the trust clearly," he said. "When you turn 35, the trust's assets are distributed. Your parents, Robert and Linda, each receive $500,000. Your brother, Brian, also receives $500,000. And you, Garrett, receive $1 million. You have full access to your portion before 35, as you did with the house. But your parents and brother, they only get their shares when you turn 35, and only if they comply with the trust's terms." I nodded, struggling to process it all. "And if they don't comply?" I asked, sensing the answer was about to change absolutely everything. Mr. Harrison looked me dead in the eye, his gaze sharp as a blade. "There's a very clear clause, Garrett. Any beneficiary who forges, misappropriates, or sells trust assets without the trustee's consent, that's you, will immediately forfeit their entire inheritance. Not only do they lose their share, but they could also face legal consequences, depending on their actions." I sat there, stunned. The ground beneath me felt like it was crumbling. Forfeit their inheritance. My parents' $500,000, Brian's $500,000. All of it could vanish because of what they'd done. I suddenly remembered my grandfather's words, "Your strength is your true asset." Was this his way? Protecting me, safeguarding what I'd built. "So, you're saying if I can prove they forged or misappropriated the house, they lose everything?" I asked, my voice trembling now, not from fear, but from this bizarre mix of pain and satisfaction. Mr. Harrison nodded. "Exactly. But we need evidence, Garrett. Documents, contracts, signatures, anything that proves they acted behind your back. If they forged your signature, or used illegal means, we could not only recover the property but also activate that forfeiture clause." He paused, his gaze softening with a hint of sympathy. "But you need to prepare yourself. This isn't just a legal matter. This is your family." Family. The word felt like a physical stab to my heart. My parents, who raised me, had become betrayers. Brian, the brother I once hoped would grow up, was part of this scheme. My eyes stung, but I absolutely refused to let the tears fall. "I understand, Mr. Harrison," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "What do I do next?" Mr. Harrison placed a hand on my shoulder, just like my grandfather used to. "You need to gather evidence. Find out exactly how they sold the house, who bought it, how the paperwork was signed. Any sign of forgery, signatures, notarizations, anything, and we have grounds to act. I'll support you every step of the way, from filing a lawsuit to enforcing the trust's clauses. But you have to be strong, Garrett. This won't be easy." I nodded. A surge of determination, fiercer than anything I'd ever felt, rose within me. I thought of my craftsman house, the rose garden I'd planted for my grandmother, all those sleepless nights I'd worked to build my life. They had taken it all, but I would not let them win. "I'll find the evidence," I said, my voice firm. "And I'll take back what's mine." As I left Mr. Harrison's office, it felt like I was walking into a battle. The Pasadena sun still shone brightly, but inside me, a storm raged. I pulled out my phone and texted David, "You were right. There's a protective clause. I'll need your help." I didn't know exactly where to start, but I knew one thing for certain, I wouldn't stop until the truth was exposed. I thought of my parents, of Brian, of every time they'd made me feel like I wasn't good enough, wasn't worthy. They thought I'd just stay silent, accept the loss, move on. But they didn't know. I was Norman Miller's grandson, and he taught me that true strength lies in will. And my will, now. It was an unquenchable fire. I decided to start at the most painful place, my craftsman house. I needed to see Ellen and George again, the elderly couple, to really dig into the sale. Last time, I was just reeling from the shock. Now, I needed specifics: who met with them, what the paperwork looked like, any other clues. In the taxi there, I just clenched my fists, trying to suppress that crushing feeling in my chest. The craftsman house came into view, those familiar stained glass windows, and the rose garden, now unevenly trimmed, like an unhealed wound. I knocked, heart pounding. Ellen opened the door, recognizing me immediately. Her friendly smile was now tinged with worry, like she sensed I wasn't there for a casual chat. "Garrett, you're back," she said, her voice soft but tense. "Come in." I stepped into the living room. George was there, newspaper in hand, but his eyes were fixed on me, wary. "Mr. Garrett," he said, putting the paper down. "What's new? Last time you mentioned something about the house. We're still not sure what's going on." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady, but my determination was impossible to hide. "Ellen, George, I'm so sorry to bother you again, but I need to know more about that sale. I believe my parents forged documents to sell this house, and I need evidence to take back what's mine." Ellen and George exchanged a look. Then she stood and pulled a stack of papers from a drawer. "We don't want any trouble," Ellen said, her voice low. Your parents and your brother, they said you were moving abroad and needed to sell quickly. They brought a deed of transfer with your signature and notarized documents. We paid in cash. Everything was finalized in a few days." I held the papers, my heart racing. The sale contract was in my father's name, Robert Miller, with my purported signature on the deed of transfer. But it wasn't mine. It was close, terrifyingly close, but there were shaky, uneven strokes, like someone had tried to mimic it. "This isn't my signature," I said, my voice catching in my throat. George frowned. They also provided a notarized document confirming everything was legal. We had no reason to suspect otherwise. I asked for permission to photograph the documents, feeling like I had found the first piece of the puzzle. Ellen looked at me, her eyes full of concern. "If you're telling the truth, we're victims too. We paid for the house, we moved in. If something's wrong, we need to know." I nodded, promising to keep them informed. As I left, I felt a weird mix of relief and simmering rage. My parents had forged my signature. Now I just needed more to tie it all together. Back at the temporary rental, I called David. He agreed to help analyze the documents and suggested checking for related paperwork at my parents' house. "If they took original documents from your house," David said, "they might still have them." The thought of going back there made me shudder, but I knew I had no choice. I had to confront them, not with anger, but discreetly. One morning, knowing they'd be out grocery shopping, I slipped inside. I quietly opened their filing cabinet. Inside were stacks of documents, bills, contracts, insurance papers. My heart practically leaped when I found a folder simply labeled Garrett's House. I opened it. It was the treasure I needed. Copies of the deed of transfer, notarized documents, and even handwritten notes. I recognized my mother's handwriting instantly, numbers, dates, and a chilling note that read, "All cash offer, quick and clean." But what really chilled me was the notarized document itself. The notary was listed as John Thompson, but the signature looked sloppy, unprofessional. I photographed everything, meticulously put it all back, and left before my parents returned. I had almost enough evidence, but I still needed to understand Brian's role. He wasn't just a beneficiary of the sale proceeds, he might have been an active participant. I went back to Brian's Instagram, reviewing his Maldives posts. And then I saw it. One photo, him with an unfamiliar man, both standing in front of a real estate office. I zoomed in. I recognized the logo of a local real estate company. This was a lead. I visited that real estate office, pretending to be a potential homebuyer, just to gather information. The agent, a woman named Avery, was overly eager. When I subtly steered the conversation towards the Craftsman house, she nodded. "Oh, the house on Oak Street. That was a quick deal. The seller was Brian Miller. He said his brother was moving abroad and needed to sell fast. We found a cash buyer right away." I kept my expression neutral, but pure rage boiled inside me. "Brian handled everything himself?" I asked. Avery nodded. "He brought all the paperwork, including his brother's signature and notarized documents. We had no reason to doubt it." I left the office, my mind reeling. Brian didn't just know about the sale. He was the one who executed it. My father forged the notarization. My mother forged my signature. And Brian handled the transaction. They had worked together, perfectly, to steal everything from me. But they made one critical mistake. They didn't know the house was tied to the trust. And I had Mr. Harrison on my side. I called Mr. Harrison again, immediately. I sent him everything, the deed with the forged signature, that questionable notarized document, and all the information from the real estate agency. He reviewed it. His voice on the phone was calm, but absolutely resolute. Garrett, this is strong evidence. A forged signature and notarization are serious legal violations. We can file a lawsuit to reclaim the house, and the forfeiture clause will be activated. But you need to be absolutely certain about this. Once we proceed, your family will never be the same. I fell silent. I thought of my parents, of Brian, of all those family dinners that were now just fractured memories. They destroyed our family first, Mr. Harrison, I said. I'm just taking back what's mine. He agreed, promising to prepare the legal documents. Stay calm, Garrett, he said. We'll do this the right way. When I hung up, I stood in front of the mirror in my hotel room. I looked at myself. I wasn't the same Garrett who'd left 6 weeks ago, the one who believed his family would never truly betray him. I was someone new now, forged by pain and burning determination. I thought of my grandfather, my rose garden, my craftsman house. I would take it all back. Not just for me, but for the promise I kept to him. True strength lies in will. After that call with Mr. Harrison, I knew. I had enough evidence, the forged deed, the fraudulent notarized document, the real estate agent confirming Brian's role. But just filing a lawsuit. That wasn't enough. I wanted my parents and Brian to face the truth, not in some sterile courtroom, but in front of everyone. In front of the relatives who'd watched me grow up, who'd listened to my parents boast about their golden boy, Brian. I wanted them to see the consequences of their actions, in person, in a moment they couldn't possibly escape. I called Aunt Susan, my mother's older sister. She was the only family member who'd ever really seen me, praised my efforts, told me Grandpa would be proud. Aunt Susan, I said, trying to keep my voice even, I want to organize a family gathering. Everyone. Aunts, uncles, cousins. I have something important to say. She hesitated, sensing the gravity in my voice. Garrett, is something wrong? She asked. I just said, I need everyone there. I'll explain later. I picked a weekend and borrowed her house. I told her it was a family update after my business trip. I didn't reveal the details, but I told my mom I wanted to make peace after recent tensions. My mother, maybe out of guilt, or maybe just confident I'd accepted the loss, agreed immediately. That's good, Garrett, she said, relief flooding her voice. The family needs to come together. Brian will be happy to see his big brother. I clenched my jaw. They had no idea this wasn't about reconciliation. This was about exposing the truth. I even asked Mr. Harrison to come, as a family friend. He agreed, bringing the trust documents and all the evidence I'd collected. Are you sure you want to do this in front of the whole family, Garrett? He asked, his voice low with concern. This will be a massive shock. I just nodded into the phone. They chose this path, Mr. Harrison. I'm just helping them see where it leads. The day of the gathering, I arrived at Aunt Susan's early, helping set up tables and food. She looked at me, her eyes full of worry. Garrett, are you okay? You seem different. I gave her a strange, tight smile. I'm fine, Aunt Susan. Today's an important day. Family members started arriving. Uncle Paul, cousins, close family friends. Everyone laughing, hugging, like it was any other normal get-together. But my heart. It was pounding like a warrior preparing for battle. My parents arrived. Dad in his new shirt, Mom in a light blue dress, her smile forced but confident. Brian showed up late, naturally, strutting in with that usual smug demeanor, wearing a white linen shirt, just like in his Maldives photos. He clapped me on the shoulder, too loudly. Big bro, you're back. How was Europe? Don't be mad about the house thing. Life's too long for that. I looked into his eyes. Just pure arrogance, untainted by remorse. I just nodded, a faint, almost invisible smile. Yeah, Brian. Life's long. Once everyone was finally settled around the tables in the backyard, I stood up. I held a glass of wine, but I didn't drink. The lively chatter slowly died down, all eyes turning to me. Thank you all for coming today, I began, my voice calm, but resonating with an undercurrent of steel. I just got back from 6 weeks in Europe, working on a major project. But today, I don't want to talk about work. I want to talk about family. About truth. About trust. And about what we do to each other. My mother looked at me, a flicker of worry in her eyes. My father crossed his arms, frowning. Brian just smirked, probably expecting some kind of apology or reconciliation. I set the wine glass down. Then, from my bag, I pulled out a stack of papers, copies of the forged deed, the fraudulent notarized document, and photos from the real estate agency. When I left for my trip, I continued, my voice slow, icy. I asked my parents to look after my craftsman house. The house I bought with my sweat, my tears, and part of the funds from Grandpa Norman's trust. But when I returned, I found out my parents sold it. Without asking me. Murmurs erupted around the table. Aunt Susan gasped, covering her mouth, her eyes wide. Cousins exchanged confused glances. My mother shot up, her voice trembling. Garrett, what are you doing? This isn't the place for this. I raised a hand, a silent command for her to sit. No, Mom. This is exactly the place. Everyone needs to know the truth. I held up the papers. This is the deed of transfer for the house. It has my signature. But I didn't sign it. This is a notarized document, supposedly signed by someone named John H. Thompson, but the signature is fake. And then, I pulled out my phone, showing the photo of Brian in front of the real estate office. And this? This is proof that Brian facilitated the sale, lying that I was moving abroad for work. The air grew heavy, suffocating. Brian's face went white. He forced a laugh. What? What are you making up, Garrett? Don't blow this out of proportion. I locked eyes with him, feeling all my pain and anger surge. Making it up. Let Mr. Harrison explain. I gestured to Mr. Harrison, who had been sitting quietly at the end of the table. He stood, holding the trust documents, his voice low but commanding. I am the attorney managing the Norman Miller Trust, he began. The Craftsman House belongs to the trust, with Garrett as the sole trustee. Selling it without his consent was illegal. But more critically, the trust has a clear clause: anyone who forges, misappropriates, or sells trust assets will immediately forfeit their inheritance. Gasps echoed around the table. My mother covered her face, stifling sobs. My father sat frozen, his hands trembling. Brian slammed the table, shouting, What? What are you talking about? It's just an old house. Mr. Harrison looked at him, his voice cold. Not just the house, Mr. Brian. You and your parents have forfeited $500,000 each from the trust, a total of $1 million. Plus a vacation cabin in Big Bear. Furthermore, forging signatures and notarizations is a criminal offense. You will face legal consequences. Silence fell, broken only by the soft rustle of the wind. Mom clutched her face, truly sobbing now. Dad approached Mr. Harrison, demanding to see the trust documents. Brian slammed the table again, yelling, What? Grandpa had that much money and left it all to Garrett. Why didn't anyone tell me? He spun towards me, his eyes bloodshot. Garrett, you knew about this and said nothing. How selfish are you? I looked at Brian, and honestly, it felt like I was staring at a spoiled, petulant child. Selfish? I replied, my voice calm but sharp as a blade. I worked my whole life to prove I was worthy of Grandpa's trust. You, Brian, only ever took handouts from Mom and Dad, living off deceit. Grandpa put me in charge of the trust because he believed I'd use it wisely. And now? You've all stripped yourselves of your own inheritance. My mother rushed to me, grabbing my hand, tears streaming down her face. Garrett, I'm so sorry. I didn't know about the trust. I just wanted to help Brian. You're his big brother. You can forgive us, right? You can share the inheritance as planned. My father, his voice hoarse, joined in. Garrett, we're family. You can't let us lose everything like this. Think it over. Brian jumped in too, his tone almost pleading now. Big bro, please. Just think it over. $2 million in inheritance isn't small. I looked at them. My mother with tear-filled eyes. My father with that defeated expression. Brian with his childish, desperate anger. Part of me, a tiny, buried part, wanted to forgive. To hug my mother, to tell them everything would be okay. But then I remembered. My rose garden. My craftsman house. And my grandfather's words, your strength is your true asset. They had chosen to betray me. Chosen Brian over justice. You're not my family, I said, my voice calm, but cutting deep. Family doesn't steal each other's dreams. My mother collapsed into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably. My father just held her, unable to meet my eyes. Brian stormed out of the backyard, muttering curses under his breath. The other family members. Some just stared. Some nodded quietly. Others, they just silently left. Aunt Susan came to my side, placing a hand on my shoulder. You did the right thing, Garrett, she said softly. Your grandfather would be proud. As everyone dispersed, I stood in the backyard, watching the sunset paint the Pasadena sky golden. Mr. Harrison patted my shoulder. You did what you had to, he said. The legal documents are ready. We'll reclaim your house, and they'll pay the price. I nodded. But inside, I didn't feel victorious. There was just an emptiness where my love for my family once was. In the days following that family gathering, I felt like I was living in a constant blur. Mr. Harrison and his legal team moved fast. They filed a lawsuit in Pasadena court, with serious charges, forged signatures, fraudulent notarization, and outright misappropriation of trust assets. I spent hours in his office, poring over every document, every piece of evidence. From the forged deed to my mother's handwritten notes, from that fake notarized document to the real estate agency's confirmation of Brian's direct involvement. Each piece felt like a fresh stab, a brutal reminder of the betrayal. But it was also a step toward justice. The police. They moved quickly too. One morning, Mr. Harrison called me. Garrett, they've opened a criminal investigation. Your parents and Brian have been summoned for questioning. I just sank into the chair in my hotel room, my hands trembling as I held the phone. Images flashed through my mind, my mother sobbing at the gathering, my father with his head bowed, Brian storming off. I didn't want them to go to jail, but I wouldn't, let them escape the consequences. What will they be charged with? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Mr. Harrison replied, his tone steady and clear. Your parents face charges of forgery and fraud. Brian is being charged with complicity and profiting from criminal proceeds. We have solid evidence, Garrett. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. What about my house? I asked. Mr. Harrison reassured me. We're working with the buyers, Ellen and George. They're victims too. So, the court will likely void the sale and refund their money. You'll get your house back, but it will take a few months. I hung up, staring out the window. The Pasadena sunlight was as radiant as the day I'd returned, but it no longer felt warm. The investigation moved even faster than I expected. The officer, a middle-aged man with a stern expression, took meticulous notes. We've checked the notarized document, he stated. The person listed as John H. Thompson doesn't exist in the notary registry. And the signature on the deed of transfer. It's been confirmed as forged through handwriting analysis. A jolt ran through me. What does that mean? I asked. The officer looked at me, his voice calm but firm. Your parents will be charged with forgery and fraud. They could face probation and restitution. Your brother Brian will be charged with complicity, and he'll have to repay all the money he used from the house sale, including the costs of his Maldives trip. I left the police station, my mind reeling. Probation, restitution, repayment. The words echoed in my head like a grim, relentless song. I hadn't wanted my family destroyed, but I couldn't forgive them either. They had chosen this path. Chosen to steal my dream. Chosen to feed Brian's laziness. I thought of my grandfather, of his words, your strength is your true asset. He was right. My strength wasn't in the house. It was in my unwavering determination to seek justice. In the weeks that followed, my family truly unraveled. My parents were formally charged. They received 3 years of probation and a substantial restitution order, mostly the money they'd gained from selling my house. They were forced to mortgage their Pasadena home, the very house I grew up in, just to cover the debt. Aunt Susan told me Mom cried every single night, while Dad barely spoke, just sitting silently in front of the TV. Brian faced even harsher consequences. The court ordered him to repay the full cost of his Maldives trip, over $20,000, and fined him for complicity. With no more financial support from our parents and no trust fund, Brian was finally left to face reality. No job, no home, a mountain of debt. I saw him once, passing by a coffee shop in downtown Pasadena. He was sitting there, a crumpled t-shirt, eyes shadowed, talking on the phone about job applications. When he saw me, he turned away, unable to meet my gaze. I didn't stop. I had nothing left to say to him. After 5 long, grueling months, I got the news from Mr. Harrison. The court had voided the sale of the Craftsman house. Ellen and George were refunded, and the house was officially returned to my name. The day I got the keys back, I stood in front of that house, a strange mix of joy and profound sorrow washing over me. The stained glass windows were still there, but the rose garden, it had withered from neglect. I stepped inside. The familiar smell of wood filled my senses, but it wasn't the same. The house had once been my dream, but now it carried the deep scars of betrayal. I spent days cleaning, restoring, trying to bring back its old beauty. But every crack in the wall, every chipped brick in the fireplace reminded me of what I'd truly lost. Not just property, but my trust in my family. I stood in the backyard, looking at those wilted rose bushes, wondering if I could revive them. Or if I could revive myself. My family, as I knew it, was shattered. Aunt Susan stayed in touch, but other relatives drifted away. A few cousins called, offering sympathy, but nobody dared to mention that gathering. My parents tried to reach out, leaving voicemails with apologies, but I didn't respond. It wasn't that I didn't want to forgive. It was that I simply wasn't ready. Maybe one day I'd sit down with them. But not now. Brian? He just disappeared from my radar. I heard he'd moved to another city, working odd jobs to pay off his debt. Part of me felt a twinge of pity, but a larger part reminded me, he chose this path. He could have grown up, stood on his own. Instead, he chose to live off deceit. I sat on the porch of my Craftsman house, a cold cup of coffee in my hand. The house was mine again. But it wasn't the dream I'd once envisioned. It was a trophy, yes, a testament to my will, but also a stark reminder of the immense cost of justice. I thought of my grandfather, of the trust, of how he protected me, even after he was gone. I wondered if he knew that one day I'd need every ounce of the strength he'd instilled in me. I stood up, walked to the backyard, and started pulling weeds, watering the surviving rose bushes. Maybe they'd bloom again. Maybe not. But I would try. As I always had. Justice had been served, but my journey, it wasn't over. I had to rebuild. Not just the house, but my entire life, one step at a time. While restoring the house, my thoughts kept returning to the trust fund, that $1 million I was set to receive when I turned 35, now just a few months away. My parents and Brian had forfeited their inheritance, meaning that $1.5 million, plus the vacation cabin in Big Bear, now belonged to me. But I couldn't keep it all for myself. My grandfather had taught me that true wealth isn't in money, but in what you leave behind for the world. So, I decided to establish the Norman Miller Foundation. A scholarship fund for young people who, like me all those years ago, worked tirelessly, counting every penny to chase their dreams. I used a portion of that trust fund to launch it, providing tuition assistance for determined students facing financial hardship. As I signed the paperwork in Mr. Harrison's office, establishing the foundation, I felt my grandfather's presence, as if he were right there, smiling at me. "Well done, Garrett," I imagined him saying. "This is true strength." The scholarship fund quickly gained attention. A few local Pasadena newspapers even ran stories, calling me the man who turned pain into hope. I never cared for the spotlight, but I felt a profound sense of pride when I received thank you letters from students. One girl wrote, "Thank you, Garrett. Because of your scholarship, I can continue college and become a doctor." Reading those words, I finally felt that my Craftsman house, my rose garden, and even my scars, they all had meaning. My family became a distant memory. I heard they'd moved to a small apartment in the suburbs, living quietly, avoiding relatives. Once, my mother sent me a handwritten letter, her shaky script filled with remorse. "Garrett, I'm so sorry. I only wanted to help Brian, but I was wrong. If you can forgive me, I'm willing to do anything." I read the letter. It sat on my table for days. But I didn't respond. It wasn't that I didn't want to forgive. It was that I genuinely didn't know how to mend what had been so utterly shattered. Brian, from what I heard, was living alone, withdrawn, seemed genuinely changed after the shock of losing his inheritance. I don't know if he was truly remorseful, but for his own sake, I hoped that one day, he would find his path. One afternoon, I sat on the porch of my Craftsman house, a hot cup of coffee in hand, gazing at the rose garden, now blooming vibrantly again. The red petals glowed under the sunlight, a beautiful reminder that life could be revived, even after the deepest wounds. This house, once a symbol of my dream, was now a symbol of resilience. I had lost my family, but in doing so, I had found the strength my grandfather always believed I possessed. I reflected on my journey, from the shock of discovering my house had been sold, to the quiet days of investigation, to that explosive moment I confronted my parents and Brian in front of the entire family. You know, in America, forging signatures to steal property, it's not uncommon. And the most painful part. It can come from those closest to you. But my story? It's proof that justice and truth, they always find a way to prevail. My parents and Brian paid a price. Not just in money, but in honor and trust. And no, I wasn't happy about it. But I didn't regret standing up for myself. I stood up, walked inside, and took an old framed photo of my grandfather. I placed it on the fireplace. He was smiling in the picture, his eyes bright, as if he knew I would overcome. "Thank you, Grandpa," I whispered. Then, I returned to the garden, picked up the watering can, and continued tending to those surviving rose bushes. My life, like this garden, would keep blooming. Not because I had everything, but because I never gave up.